Would you please welcome Max Borders?
Thank you. Oh, yeah, this one works great. So I don't have my prompt up here, so I'll just occasionally look over and hope that this clicker works. And say quickly that Michael is one of my mentors and heroes, and he is in very great measure responsible for my standing here, so thank you, Michael. So subversive innovation is an awful heavy phrase, but we'll get to why I'm going to say that. So let me start with a bold claim, and that is that the social singularity is near. The social singularity is near. I'll spend the next 15 minutes or so telling you why I think that is, why I think the people in this room are going to catalyze the social singularity, and that the people in this room are also going to help prepare humanity for its consequences, good and bad. This fellow is a famous Canadian thinker, McLuhan, who said, "We become what we behold, we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us." That's a familiar quote probably for the folks here in Silicon Valley, but we can add to that our own variation on that, which I'm having trouble seeing it, is we add, say it again? Now the red one. Yes, that's the one. The emphasis then is on rules. So we're not only about creating gadgets and interesting software here in Silicon Valley, you guys are also, the folks in this room, about creating new rules. And that is a fundamentally different shift in thinking that is to follow. So we change the tools, we change the rules, and we change the culture. In fact, culture and technology, for example, co-evolve. There's a process of coevolution that occurs. You can think of all of these examples up here. Money gives rise to an economic revolution, the optic lens to a scientific revolution. There's a back and forth, a vacillating tandem between technology and culture throughout the ages. Just think, only 5, maybe 6 years ago, it was completely taboo, with rare exception, to ride in a stranger's car or to sleep in a stranger's home, both of which I did today. Okay? We see ride sharing as another technological phenomenon that came out of the mobility revolution, and we see Tinder as a technological change that came out of the sexual revolution. But this process, this coevolution between culture and technology happens, and it's accelerating. Okay? So there are 4 primary or fundamental forces, I would say, that are all involved in this coevolutionary process that the folks here should pay attention to. That is our human nature, which basically constrains us in what's possible as human beings. We are basically, more or less, the same Paleolithic creatures that we were when we were roaming around on the African steppe, hunting and gathering. Institutions, these are the rules of the game that I was talking about. The social operating systems that shape our behaviors in society. Technology, the stuff that many of the folks here in the room are participants in creating, and certainly that we all use. And culture that both is generated from the former 3 and that shapes the former 3. All these work in an important process of interplay. Okay? So in paying attention to these 4 areas, that's really what we need to do to take the macro picture of all this. Just as Michael said, we need to talk about the rules of the game, where Dubai transplants the British common law and achieves remarkable success. But we also need to pay attention to the cultural and the our human natures, which we may soon be augmenting if you're into transhumanism at all. And technology, of course. So now, now we're getting to the question of the social singularity. What is it that's about to change? Currently, we have all these familiar mediating structures that we've all grown up with, we're all used to, and we accept them pretty much as a given. That's government, courts, police, and so on, education, primary, secondary, higher education. You go to college, and you do well after college, all that good stuff. And they give you the truth. You know, the professors give you the light and the good, and you pass the test, and you get your pellet. We've got business corporations structured as they are, as sort of corporate hierarchies. And unless you're Brian Robertson, of course. And you have philanthropy. We have mediating structures for giving, even. We have science, university peer centers, and so peer review and credentialed experts that tell us what the science of the day is. And finally, media. You know, good old Walter Cronkite delivering truth to us on the nightly news, right? All these mediating structures. And yet, they're showing their cracks. All of these mediating structures are showing their cracks. They're all vulnerable. They're all about to change. Why? It's because of what I call the 4 C's. Corruption, complexity, connectivity, and cryptography. Okay? These 4 combined mean these mediating structures are about to change in a fundamental way. First, corruption. I'm from North Carolina, so we say they ain't no angels where I come from. But following James Madison, the idea that power can be stewarded by angels is generally the operating theory of most people when it comes to the very notion of governance. Douglas North, Nobel laureate, in terms of the rules of the game, basically said that if your rules are set up in such a way that they reward piracy, you're going to get more pirates. If your rules are set up in such a way that rewards productivity, you're going to get productive firms emerging. And we see that around the world. I mean, basically the entire morning has been examples and testaments to those 2 contrasting notions. He won a Nobel Prize for his institutional economics. We have to pay very close attention to this in creating startup societies. But why does this process of corruption happen? Well, one reason is this sort of unreflective worship of power. Politicians, even in the good old democratic societies like the United States, they trade favors with corporate interests and constituency groups in exchange for power. And that, folks, is the nature of the beast. That is a neither right nor left concept. That just is. Concentration of power and influence as a mediating structure start to blur together to form unholy alliances of the wealthy and the powerful. Slow transformation of society from productivity to piracy. I see a lot of folks in here from the developing world who live in every day having to pay a bribe or just to get anything done, to go to the highest echelons and talk to someone you know in order to do something as simple as starting a business. And then value is lost in this process of decline. And once we see this, once we get this fundamental insight of public choice, we start to feel nihilistic about policy. And for some, there's this sense that there's no way out of this trap, this process identified by Mansur Olson, for example, as concentrated benefits, dispersed costs, if you want to get fancy in the way of talking about it. So here we then have a common enemy, and it is power. Power. Power itself is the enemy. I know that's bold, and I know a lot of people don't like to think of it that way, but I'm going to say it. The church of power, we have folks thinking that social progress is supposed to occur through the coercive apparatus of politics, primarily. And they're unable to imagine the social change can happen without it. It's just the anchor box that we've all sort of been brought up in. And it's the biggest, baddest hierarchical mediating structure, of course, is the government. And these other mediating structures form around it, coalesce around it, and they start to blur together in further unholy alliances. Now, I know what I'm saying sounds like some crazy anarchist, but what I'm trying to do is disabuse us of the idea as power in the service of the good, just as Dale Brown did when he was up here on the very, very local scale of Detroit. So what about electoral reform? I mean, we've got this awesome system of government that I call DOS. There's a blue app and a red app. Those are our choices. So we really expect to have any kind of meaningful reform in that way? I would submit to you that we are coming to the end of the age of politics, at least as we know it. This is a laundry list of my grievances with politics. We can do better than DOS. Whenever we vote, we're essentially crying a teardrop in the ocean. We really expect to affect change that way? Come on. Special interests rule anyway. Let's be honest with ourselves. This politics stuff, it makes us tribal, closed-minded, spiteful, destroys pluralism, community, economies, and I believe it has outlived its usefulness. The third C, complexity. The second C, complexity. I've been given a warning about time, so I'll go through this very briefly. Any of these agents, any of these nodes in this hierarchical structure could be seen as an individual person. As the world becomes more complex, any given agent or node in that network is unable to deal or reckon with the complexity that impinges on said node from without. So that there has to be a complexity transition in order for that complexity to be dealt with. And it looks something like this. This is a familiar picture to people who are in decentralization space, and Bitcoiners and so on. But this comes from complex systems research, and we see this over and over and over again, these complexity transitions. Connectivity. We are connected. The blue church here, I encourage you to read the work of Jordan Greenhall, or listen to his talks, but he essentially postulates the idea that this in the media and in academia, this idea of this sort of unidirectional experts who are sort of giving us one-way information, these directional flows through hierarchies, and then finally it becomes bidirectional. You kind of try to travel up the chains of command in order to affect change. But these structures are going away. In the major media, they already have. However, the obsolescence of mediating structures is not possible and is no good to anyone without connectivity, which both causes and completes the complexity transition. And then, of course, there's cryptography. And this has been huge. No mystery to you guys. That causes disintermediation, which means lowering the cost of exit. So when you heard about this conference I run called Voice and Exit, I'm talking about the human algorithm here. I'm talking about the idea that if you live within a system and you want to try to change it, you exercise voice. And if that doesn't work, what do? You leave. You leave the system to start something new. Just like you fork the code. It's just like, by God, I can't stand SegWit 2 or whatever. I'm going to go start something else. This, I would submit to you, is the human algorithm. And the more we lower the cost of exit by creating new opportunities, the better. So very quickly, how long do I have? 2 minutes? 2 minutes is good. The social singularity, I submit to you, is coming. This is how it's going to happen. The transition is going to be brutal. It's going to be wrenching, but it's also going to be beautiful, and in the end, a better world will result. The catalyst for this I call subversive innovation. As you can see, I've trademarked it, so you're going to get sued if you try to use it. And all of you are subversive innovators. This is a great quote from Dan Dennett, which I don't have time for, but you can read it quickly, and our new version of it for subversive innovators. These are the 4 areas of subversive innovation that we want to work in. Networking technologies, legal technologies like that, Tom W. Bell and others, Michael Strong and others are developing in places like Honduras and on the seasteads. Sense-making technologies, this is how we understand the world in a peer-to-peer fashion, intersubjectively. and eudaimonic technologies. And finally, all of these interrelate in interesting ways. I am unfortunately out of time, but I want to close by saying that you are all hastening, bringing about the post-political era. But just by virtue of being innovators and by virtue of being culture changers, you are going to bring about post-politics. And though it'll be a much more pluralistic world, it will be a much more peaceful and prosperous one in any case. So this is what I've devoted my life to recently. My organization, Social Evolution, is concerned with these issues, and our first order of business is going to be a digital content hub. Thank you for listening.